The clock on the wall showed 2:47 p.m. when Lisa finished wiping down the last table in her section. Her feet ached in those cheap sneakers she'd bought on sale 3 months ago, and there was still the dinner shift to get through. But right now, she had exactly 43 minutes before the evening prep started, and she knew exactly how she wanted to spend them. She glanced around the restaurant. The lunch crowd had cleared out, leaving just a couple finishing their coffee by the window. Her manager, Mrs. Chen, was in the back office doing paperwork. The coast was clear. Lisa walked across the polished marble floor toward the grand piano sitting in the restaurant's lobby. It was one of those decorative pieces that fancy restaurants kept around to look elegant, you know? Nobody really played it anymore. The owner had bought it years ago from some estate sale, thinking it made the place look sophisticated. Most days it just collected dust and held flower arrangements. She sat down on the worn velvet bench and lifted the fallboard, revealing the yellowed ivory keys. The piano was out of tune. She knew that. Everyone knew that. But it was the only piano she had access to, and she wasn't about to let that stop her. Her fingers found their familiar positions, and she began to play. Not loudly, never loudly during work hours, just soft enough that it wouldn't disturb the remaining customers, but loud enough that she could hear the notes, could feel the music flowing through her hands. This was her secret escape. Her moment of peace in the middle of double shifts and aching muscles and bills that never seemed to stop coming. For these precious minutes, she wasn't a waitress struggling to make rent. She was a pianist, an artist, someone with a dream that felt bigger than the tiny apartment she shared with 2 roommates. Lisa had been playing piano since she was 7 years old. Her grandmother, the woman who raised her after her parents passed away, had taught her on an old keyboard they'd found at a thrift store. It only had 61 keys instead of the full 88, and half the sounds didn't work properly. But her grandmother made it magical anyway. Music isn't about having the fanciest instrument, her grandmother used to say, her weathered hands guiding Lisa's small fingers across the keys. It's about what you put into it. Your heart, your soul, your story. Her grandmother had been gone for 2 years now, but Lisa carried those words with her every single day, especially on the hard days, especially when she worked her 3rd double shift of the week and came home too exhausted to practice properly. But she never stopped practicing. Never stopped believing. In exactly 3 weeks, she had an audition with the city's symphony orchestra. It was a long shot, she knew that. Hundreds of pianists would audition for maybe 2 open positions. Most of them had been training at prestigious conservatories, had private instructors, had pianos in their homes that cost more than Lisa made in a year. But she had something too. She had 3 years of saving every spare dollar, 3 years of watching YouTube tutorials at midnight and practicing scales until her fingers cramped, 3 years of believing that maybe, just maybe, hard work could make up for what she lacked in advantages. Hey girl, sounding good today. Lisa looked up to see her coworker Rachel setting up tables for the dinner service. Rachel was one of the few people who understood. She had her own dreams too, saving up for nursing school while working at the restaurant. Thanks, Lisa smiled, finishing the piece she was working on. It was Chopin, always Chopin for her audition. The Nocturne in E-flat major, her grandmother's favorite. You ready for that audition? Rachel asked, folding napkins into the fancy triangles the restaurant required. I don't know, Lisa admitted, closing the piano fallboard gently. Some days I feel ready. Other days I feel crazy for even trying. Well, I think you're amazing, Rachel said firmly. And you're going to blow them away. Lisa wished she had Rachel's confidence. The truth was, she was terrified. What if she wasn't good enough? What if all these years of sacrifice and hope and practice led to nothing but rejection? What if the people on that audition panel looked at her the way some customers did? Like she was just a waitress who should know her place. She shook off the thought and headed to the back to grab her apron for the evening shift. No time for doubt. She had tables to serve and tips to earn and a dream that wasn't going to fund itself. The dinner rush started promptly at 6 o'clock, as it always did on Friday evenings. The restaurant, called the Grandview, was the kind of place where business people came to impress clients and wealthy folks came to be seen. Lisa had been working there for 3 years and she'd gotten good at reading people. She could tell who would tip well, who would be demanding, who would treat her like a human being, and who would treat her like furniture. At 7:15, a group of 4 men in expensive suits walked in. The host seated them at table 12 right in Lisa's section. She grabbed her notepad and headed over, putting on her professional smile. The one that said, "I'm here to serve you," even when she was exhausted. "Good evening, gentlemen. Can I start you off with some drinks?" 3 of them ordered quickly, politely. But the 4th man, the one who was clearly the leader of the group, barely glanced at her. He was in his mid-50s, she guessed, with silver hair styled perfectly and a watch that probably cost more than her entire year's salary. "Bring me your most expensive scotch," he said, not looking up from his phone. "And make sure it's neat. Last time I was here, they ruined a perfectly good whiskey with too much ice." "Of course, sir. I'll make sure it's perfect." Lisa had dealt with difficult customers before. It came with the job. She brought their drinks, took their orders, and made sure everything was exactly as they wanted it. The 3 other men were pleasant enough, thanking her each time she came to the table. But the silver-haired man, he seemed to exist in a world where servers were invisible until he needed something. She was refilling water glasses when she overheard Rachel talking to another server near the kitchen. "Did you hear? Lisa has that big audition coming up. 3 weeks from now. Symphony orchestra. No way. That's incredible." Lisa felt her cheeks warm with a mix of pride and embarrassment. She loved that her coworkers supported her, but she also felt exposed. What if she failed? What if she had to come back and face everyone after rejection? She didn't notice that the silver-haired man at table 12 had overheard every word. As she approached to clear their appetizer plates, she heard him chuckle. Not a kind chuckle. A mocking one, did I hear correctly? He said loudly enough that nearby tables could hear. "You're auditioning for the symphony?" Lisa froze, plates in her hands. "Yes, sir. In a few weeks." He leaned back in his chair, looking at her fully for the first time that evening. His eyes swept over her uniform, her name tag, her worn shoes. His smile wasn't warm. It was the smile of someone who found something amusing at someone else's expense. "That's adorable," he said to his companions, though his voice carried across the section. "A waitress who thinks she can be a concert pianist." "What's next? The busboy conducting the Philharmonic?" His friends laughed uncomfortably. One of them muttered, "Come on, David, that's a bit much." But David wasn't finished. He looked directly at Lisa, and his next words cut deeper than any knife in the restaurant's kitchen. "Let me give you some free advice, sweetheart. Some people are meant to serve. Some people are meant to perform. Very few can do both, and you need to accept which category you fall into. Save yourself the embarrassment and stick to what you know. You'll thank me later." The restaurant seemed to go quiet, though Lisa knew that was probably just in her head. Her hands trembled slightly, making the plates rattle. She felt every eye in the section on her, watching to see how she would react. She wanted to say something, wanted to defend herself, to tell him he was wrong, that he didn't know anything about her or her talent or her dreams. But she needed this job. She needed every dollar from every shift to make that audition happen. So she did what she'd learned to do in 3 years of serving people who sometimes forgot she was human. She smiled, took a breath, and said quietly, "I'll get your entrees right away, sir." As she walked toward the kitchen, she felt something crack inside her chest. Not break exactly, but crack, like pressure building up that had nowhere to go. Mrs. Chen was standing by the kitchen door. She'd seen everything. She'd heard everything. And the look on her face said that something was about to happen, something that would change everything. Mrs. Chen didn't say anything at first. She just stood there, arms crossed, watching Lisa try to compose herself in the kitchen doorway. The older woman had owned the Grandview for 15 years, and in that time, she'd seen plenty of difficult customers. But something about tonight felt different. Lisa blinked rapidly, refusing to let the tears fall. Not here, not at work. She grabbed the entree plates from the warming station, balancing them carefully on her arms the way she'd learned to do. Muscle memory took over when emotions got too heavy to carry. "Lisa, wait." Mrs. Chen's voice stopped her before she could push back through the kitchen doors. "I'm fine. Mrs. Chen, really, I can handle it." "I know you can handle it," Mrs. Chen said quietly. "I've watched you handle rude customers for 3 years. You're one of the best servers I've ever had, but that doesn't mean you should have to." Lisa didn't know what to say to that. In her experience, having a job meant putting up with whatever came your way. You smiled, you served, you collected your tips, and you went home. That was the deal. "Just deliver the food," Mrs. Chen said finally. "Then come find me. I have an idea." Lisa nodded, though confusion flickered across her face. She pushed through the doors and made her way back to table 12. her professional mask firmly in place. The four men were deep in conversation about some real estate deal, barely acknowledging her as she set down their steaks and salmon. David, the silver-haired man who'd mocked her, didn't even look up. He just cut into his steak and continued talking about profit margins and property values, as if he hadn't just crushed someone's dream under his expensive Italian leather shoes a few minutes earlier. Lisa finished her other tables on autopilot. She refilled drinks, cleared plates, smiled at customers, and pretended her hands weren't still shaking. Rachel caught her eye from across the dining room and mouthed, "You okay?" Lisa just nodded and kept moving. 20 minutes later, she found Mrs. Chen in the small office behind the kitchen, writing something in a leather-bound notebook. The older woman looked up and gestured for Lisa to close the door. "Sit down for a minute, Mrs. Chen. I really should get back to my section." "Sit," Lisa sat. Mrs. Chen had that tone that meant she wasn't asking. "How much do you know about that man at table 12? The one who decided to share his opinions about your life?" "Nothing really. Just that he has terrible manners and too much money." A small smile crossed Mrs. Chen's face. "His name is David Hutchinson. He owns half the commercial real estate in this city. He's also one of the main sponsors for the Symphony's annual fundraising gala." Lisa's stomach dropped. Of course he was, because apparently the universe had a sense of humor. "He comes here once a month," Mrs. Chen continued. "Always orders the most expensive items. Always treats the staff like we're beneath him. And I've been looking for a reason to teach him a lesson for about 2 years now." "Mrs. Chen, please don't do anything that might jeopardize the restaurant. I can handle—" "I'm not going to jeopardize anything," Mrs. Chen interrupted. "But I'm going to give him an opportunity to eat his words. The question is, are you brave enough to help me do it?" Lisa stared at her boss, completely confused. "What do you mean?" Mrs. Chen leaned forward, her eyes sharp and focused. "That piano in our lobby? The one you play during your breaks? I want you to play it for him. Right now, tonight." "What?" "No, absolutely not, Mrs. Chen, I can't." "Why not?" "Because it's out of tune. Because I'm exhausted from working all day. Because my hands are tired and I haven't warmed up properly and I'm not ready and because you're afraid," Mrs. Chen said gently, "which I completely understand. But let me tell you what I'm willing to bet on you." She pulled out her checkbook and started writing. Lisa watched in confusion as Mrs. Chen filled out the check and held it up. "If you play for that arrogant man and he's not impressed, I will personally comp his meals here for the next 6 months. That's about $12,000 worth of business I'll eat, no pun intended." "Mrs. Chen, you can't afford to." "But," Mrs. Chen continued, holding up a finger, "if you play and prove him wrong, if you show him that a waitress can have talent that would make his jaw drop, then he writes a check for $5,000 to the Symphony's scholarship fund. In your name." Lisa felt like all the air had been sucked out of the small office. "You're serious. Completely serious. I've watched you practice on that piano for 3 years, Lisa. I've heard you play when you think nobody's listening. You're good. Really good? Good enough that I'm willing to bet $12,000 on you. But what if I mess up? What if I freeze? What if he's right and I'm just deluding myself about—" Mrs. Chen reached across the desk and took Lisa's hand. Her grip was firm and warm. "That man out there judges people based on their job title and their bank account. He thinks he knows what talent looks like because he surrounded himself with people who bought their way into opportunities. But you've earned every note you can play. You've practiced on broken keyboards and out-of-tune pianos. You've given up sleep and weekends and probably a social life to chase this dream. That's real dedication. That's real talent." Lisa felt tears welling up again, but this time for a different reason. "I don't have to do this," Mrs. Chen said softly. "If you want to say no, we'll forget I ever suggested it. You'll finish your shift and life goes on, but I think you should do it. Not for me, not for that scholarship money, but for you. Because that man tried to make you feel small, and you deserve the chance to prove you're anything but." The office was quiet except for the muffled sounds of the restaurant beyond the door. Lisa thought about her grandmother, about those hours on the thrift store keyboard. She thought about every double shift, every sore foot. Every moment she'd questioned whether she was crazy for believing she could be more than what people saw when they looked at her uniform. "Okay," she whispered. "Okay, I'll do it." Mrs. Chen smiled, really smiled for the first time that evening. "Good. Now let's go make this interesting." They walked out together and Lisa felt her heart hammering in her chest. This was insane. This was absolutely crazy. She was about to play piano for a room full of people while still wearing her waitress uniform, still smelling like the kitchen, still exhausted from an 8-hour shift. Mrs. Chen approached table 12 with Lisa trailing behind. David was signing his credit card receipt, getting ready to leave. Perfect timing, Lisa thought. Or terrible timing. She couldn't decide which. "Mr. Hutchinson," Mrs. Chen said, her voice carrying that particular tone of authority that made people stop and listen. "I couldn't help but overhear your comments earlier about my employee." David looked up, mildly annoyed at being interrupted. And I'd like to propose a wager." That got his attention. His 3 companions also looked interested now. Rich people, Lisa had learned, loved competition almost as much as they loved money. "What kind of wager?" David asked, leaning back in his chair with an amused expression. "Lisa here is going to play our piano for you. If you're unimpressed, if you still think she should stick to serving tables, I'll comp your meals here for the next 6 months." David's eyebrows rose. "That's generous. And if I'm impressed? Then you write a check for $5,000 to the Symphony Scholarship Fund." In her name, the table went quiet. David studied Mrs. Chen's face, looking for any sign she was joking. Then he looked at Lisa, really looked at her for the second time that night. "You're serious about this?" "Completely," Mrs. Chen said. One of David's companions, a younger man with kind eyes, leaned forward. "Come on, David, it's just a piano performance. What have you got to lose?" "My dignity if she's terrible," David said. But Lisa could see he was intrigued. His ego wanted to win, wanted to be proven right. "Fine," he said finally. "I accept your wager. This should be entertaining." The way he said entertaining made Lisa's blood boil, like she was a circus act, a joke. Mrs. Chen squeezed her shoulder once, a silent message of confidence, and then stepped aside. Lisa walked toward the lobby piano, aware that conversation in the dining room was dying down. People were noticing something was happening. Rachel gave her a thumbs up from across the room. The hostess looked confused but interested. She sat down at the bench, her waitress apron still tied around her waist. The piano felt familiar under her fingertips, even though her hands were trembling. She could feel David's eyes on her back, could feel the weight of everyone's expectations and doubts. For a moment, she let herself be terrified. Let herself feel the full weight of what she was about to do. And then she thought of her grandmother, thought of every person who'd ever been told they weren't good enough, weren't the right fit, didn't belong. She placed her fingers on the cut and she began to play. The first note hung in the air, like a question waiting to be answered. Lisa closed her eyes and let her fingers find their way across the keys. She'd played this piece so many times that her hands knew the path even when her mind was racing. Chopin's Nocturne in E-flat major, her grandmother's favorite, the piece she'd been practicing for her audition. The piano was out of tune, just like she knew it would be. Some of the keys stuck slightly and others rang out sharper than they should. But Lisa had learned long ago that perfection wasn't about the instrument. It was about what you brought to it. She started softly, the way the piece was meant to begin. Gentle, almost like a whisper. The kind of music that made you lean in closer to hear it properly. Behind her, she could sense the restaurant going quiet. The clinking of silverware stopped. Conversations faded. Even the kitchen staff had paused in the doorway to listen. But Lisa wasn't thinking about any of them right now. Not even David with his smug smile and his cruel words. Right now, she was 7 years old again, sitting next to her grandmother on that cramped bench in their tiny apartment. She could almost smell the jasmine tea her grandmother always kept brewing on the stove. Could almost hear her grandmother's patient voice. "Don't rush, sweetheart. Let each note breathe. Music isn't a race to the finish line." Lisa's fingers moved faster now, building into the more complex middle section. This was where the piece got tricky, where you had to balance speed with emotion, technique with feeling. Her left hand maintained the steady rhythm while her right hand danced across the higher notes, weaving the melody through like a golden thread through fabric. She made a tiny mistake on one of the transitions. Just a small stumble that probably nobody else even noticed. But she noticed. For half a second, doubt crept in, that voice in her head that sounded a lot like David. "You're not good enough. You're just a waitress pretending to be something you're not." But then she remembered something else her grandmother used to say. "Mistakes aren't failures, honey. They're just proof you're human. It's what you do after the mistake that matters." So Lisa kept playing. She poured everything into the next phrase, making it even more beautiful to make up for that tiny stumble. She thought about every double shift she'd worked. Every time her feet ached so badly she could barely stand. Every bill she'd paid late because she'd chosen to save money for sheet music instead. Every morning she'd woken up at 5 a.m. to practice before her shift, because it was the only quiet time she had. All of that struggle, all of that sacrifice, all of that hope, it flowed through her fingers and into the keys. The music swelled, reaching the emotional peak of the piece. This was the part that always made her grandmother cry. The part where the melody climbed higher and higher, as if reaching for something just beyond grasp. It was hopeful and heartbreaking at the same time, like watching the sun set and knowing it will rise again but feeling the loss of daylight anyway. Lisa's whole body was involved now, swaying slightly with the music, her foot working the sustain pedal to let the notes blend and echo. Her eyes were still closed, but tears leaked from beneath her eyelids. She wasn't sad exactly. It was bigger than that. It was everything she'd been holding inside for 3 years coming out all at once through her fingertips. She thought about her parents, who she barely remembered but whose photographs sat on her nightstand. She thought about her grandmother, who'd worked 3 jobs to keep food on the table and still found time to teach a little girl how to make magic with a broken keyboard. She thought about Rachel and Mrs. Chen and every person who'd believed in her when she struggled to believe in herself. And somewhere in the middle of all that emotion, something shifted inside her. That crack in her chest, the one that had formed when David mocked her, it broke open completely. But instead of pain, what came out was power, strength, a fierce certainty that she belonged here, at this piano, making this music regardless of what anyone else thought. The piece began to wind down, returning to that gentle, whisper-soft quality from the beginning. Lisa's fingers slowed, each note deliberate and precious. She played the final phrase with such tenderness it was like tucking a child into bed. The last note faded into silence, and she held her hands there on the keys for a moment, letting the vibration die away completely. Then she opened her eyes. The restaurant was absolutely silent. For a second, Lisa panicked. Had it been terrible? Had she embarrassed herself completely? She turned slowly on the bench, afraid to see the expressions on people's faces. What she saw took her breath away. Rachel was crying openly, not even trying to hide it. The hostess had her hand over her mouth, eyes wide. Several customers at nearby tables were staring at her with expressions of complete shock. Even the line cooks, tough guys who usually acted like nothing impressed them, were watching from the kitchen doorway with something like awe on their faces. And then someone started clapping. It was one of David's companions, the younger man with kind eyes. He stood up from the table and applauded, loud and enthusiastic. Then another person joined in, and another. Within seconds, the entire restaurant was on their feet, applause filling the space like a wave. Lisa stood up shakily, completely overwhelmed. She'd played in recitals before, back when her grandmother was alive and could afford the occasional lesson, but she'd never experienced anything like this. This wasn't polite applause. This was real. This was people responding to something they'd felt. Her eyes found Mrs. Chen, who was beaming with pride, wiping away her own tears with a napkin. Then her gaze moved to David. He was still sitting down, but his arms weren't crossed anymore. His smug expression had vanished completely. He was staring at her with something that looked almost like shock. His mouth was slightly open, and if Lisa didn't know better, she'd say his eyes looked a bit misty. The applause continued for what felt like forever, but was probably only 30 seconds. Finally, it began to die down, and people slowly took their seats again, murmuring to each other in amazed voices. David stood up slowly. Lisa braced herself, expecting him to find some way to dismiss what had just happened, to explain it away or minimize it somehow. Rich people were good at that, she'd learned, good at protecting their egos. But when he spoke, his voice was different than before, quieter, almost uncertain. I was wrong. 2 simple words, but they seemed to cost him something to say. He walked toward her, his expensive shoes clicking on the marble floor. Up close, Lisa could see that his eyes were actually wet. He was fighting it, trying to maintain his composure, but emotion was written all over his face. I was wrong, he repeated, and this time his voice cracked slightly. That was extraordinary. Lisa didn't know what to say. She'd been prepared for mockery, for dismissal, for him to find some technical flaw to criticize. She hadn't been prepared for this. David pulled out his wallet and withdrew a leather-bound checkbook. But instead of writing quickly and moving on, he paused. His hand was actually shaking slightly. "The bet was for $5,000 to the scholarship fund," he said, his voice still thick with emotion. "But that seems inadequate now. Insultingly inadequate." He started writing, and Lisa watched the numbers appear on the check. 5 became 50. $50,000. The entire restaurant seemed to gasp collectively. Rachel let out a small shriek of joy. Mrs. Chen's hand flew to her chest, but David wasn't finished. He tore out the check and held it out to Lisa. Not to Mrs. Chen, not to the Symphony Fund, to Lisa directly. "This isn't for the fund," he said quietly. "This is for you. For whatever you need. Better instruments. Private instruction. Living expenses so you don't have to work yourself into exhaustion while trying to pursue this. Because what I just witnessed? That wasn't just talent. That was art. That was a gift. And I almost made you ashamed of it." Lisa stared at the check in his hand, unable to move. $50,000. That was more than she made in 2 years of working double shifts. "That was enough to change everything. I don't understand," she whispered. David's eyes met hers, and she saw something in them she hadn't expected to see. Regret. Real, genuine regret. "I've spent 20 years building an empire," he said, so quietly that only she and the people closest could hear. 20 years making money and convincing myself that was what mattered. That success meant profit margins and property holdings and being able to afford the most expensive scotch. He paused, swallowing hard. "But I forgot what it feels like to witness something that money can't buy. Something pure and real and created from passion instead of calculation. You reminded me of that tonight. You reminded me that I used to want something beyond just wealth." A tear actually escaped and rolled down his cheek. He wiped it away quickly, almost angrily, as if embarrassed by his own emotion. "Take the check," he said, pressing it into her hand. "And please accept my apology. It's not just for tonight, but for every time I've looked at someone and assumed I knew their worth based on their occupation or their circumstances. You've taught me something tonight that I'd forgotten a long time ago." Lisa's fingers closed around the check. She was crying too now, unable to stop the tears from flowing. "What did I teach you?" she asked softly. David smiled, and for the first time that evening it reached his eyes. "That dreams don't have price tags. They have courage tags, and you, young lady, are one of the bravest people I've ever met." Lisa sat in her tiny apartment that night, staring at the check on her kitchen table. $50,000. The numbers didn't seem real, no matter how many times she looked at them. She'd placed the check under her grandmother's old music box for safekeeping, as if it might disappear if she didn't weigh it down with something meaningful. Rachel had insisted on coming home with her after their shift ended. Now her friend sat across from her, drinking cheap tea from mismatched mugs and grinning like she'd won the lottery herself. "You know what this means, right?" Rachel said, waving her mug excitedly. "You can actually focus on your audition. You can cut back your hours. You can get a real piano teacher. You can buy nice concert clothes. You can actually live like a human being instead of a zombie who works 80 hours a week." Lisa nodded, but her mind was somewhere else. She kept thinking about David's face, the way it had transformed from smugness to shock to something that looked almost like pain, the tear that had escaped down his cheek. "He cried," she said softly. "Did you see that?" "He actually cried." "I saw it," Rachel confirmed. "Girl, you didn't just play piano tonight. You cracked open that man's entire soul. It was like watching someone remember they had a heart." Lisa picked up the check, holding it carefully. "He said he used to want something beyond just making money. I keep wondering what he meant by that." "Does it matter?" Rachel asked. "He's giving you a chance to chase your dream." "That's what matters." But it did matter to Lisa, because she'd seen something in David's eyes that she recognized, the same thing she saw in her own mirror sometimes: fear. The fear of waking up one day and realizing you'd spent your whole life being what other people expected instead of who you actually were. The next morning, Lisa went to the bank as soon as it opened. She half expected them to tell her the check was fake, some kind of cruel joke, but the teller processed it without any problem, and suddenly Lisa's bank account had more zeros than she'd ever imagined possible. Her first call was to her piano instructor from years ago, Professor Mitchell. He'd taught her when she was younger, back when her grandmother could scrape together enough money for monthly lessons. He'd always said she had real potential, but lessons had stopped when her grandmother got sick and the money ran out. "Lisa?" His warm voice came through the phone, surprised and delighted. Is that really you? It's been what, 4 years? 5, Lisa corrected, her throat tight with emotion. Professor Mitchell, I need your help. I have an audition with the symphony in 3 weeks and I need to be ready. She told him everything. The restaurant, the practicing on the out-of-tune piano, the audition, and finally the night before. The humiliation, the challenge, the performance, and the check. There was a long silence on the other end of the line. $50,000. Professor Mitchell repeated slowly. Lisa, that's extraordinary. And you deserve every penny of it. Your grandmother would be so proud. Lisa's eyes filled with tears at the mention of her grandmother. Can you help me prepare? She asked. I know it's short notice and I know I'm probably not ready, but you stop that right now. Professor Mitchell interrupted firmly. I heard the doubt in your voice and I won't have it. You were talented 5 years ago. I can only imagine what you've developed after 5 years of dedicated practice. When can you come by? They set up a schedule, 3 sessions a week leading up to the audition. Professor Mitchell refused to let her pay for the first month of lessons. Consider it an investment, he said. When you're a famous concert pianist, you can mention in interviews that I taught you. That'll be payment enough. Lisa's second call was to her manager at the restaurant. Mrs. Chen, I need to talk to you about my schedule. They met at the Grandview an hour before the lunch shift. Mrs. Chen ordered them both coffee and sat down across from Lisa in a quiet booth. I want to cut back to 3 shifts a week, Lisa said, her voice nervous. Just until the audition. I need time to practice properly, to work with my old instructor, to actually prepare instead of just surviving. Mrs. Chen smiled. I was wondering when you'd ask. Of course you can cut back. In fact, I was going to suggest it myself. You need to focus on your music now, not on whether Table 7 wants their dressing on the side. Relief flooded through Lisa. Thank you. For everything. For believing in me. For setting up that challenge. For being selfish. Mrs. Chen interrupted with a laugh. Because that's what it was, you know. I wanted to see that arrogant man eat humble pie. You gave me that gift, but her expression turned serious. Although something interesting happened this morning. David Hutchinson called me. Lisa's stomach dropped. Is he trying to take back the check? No, nothing like that. Actually, he wanted to know more about you. Your story. I didn't tell him much, just that you'd been working here for 3 years. That you practiced on your breaks. That your grandmother raised you and taught you to play. Mrs. Chen paused, stirring her coffee thoughtfully.
He got very quiet when I mentioned your grandmother.
Then he asked me something strange. He asked if I thought people could change. If someone who'd spent years being one way could become something different. What did you tell him? I told him I believed people could grow if they wanted to badly enough. He thanked me and hung up. But I got the feeling he wasn't really asking about people in general. I think he was asking about himself. Over the next 3 weeks, Lisa's life transformed in ways she couldn't have imagined. With her reduced work schedule, she had time to practice 5 hours a day instead of 1 or 2 exhausted hours late at night. Professor Mitchell worked with her on the pieces she'd chosen for the audition, refining her technique and helping her add depth to her interpretation. She bought her first real concert dress, a simple but elegant black gown that made her feel like a different person when she put it on. She got her hair cut properly for the first time in 2 years. She even splurged on a pair of good shoes that didn't make her feet ache. But the strangest thing was the envelope that arrived at the restaurant a week after that night. It was addressed to her, with no return address. Inside was a handwritten letter on expensive stationery. Dear Lisa, it began in neat, careful handwriting. I hope you don't mind me writing to you. I got your address from Mrs. Chen. I wanted you to know what's happened since that night at the restaurant. I haven't been able to stop thinking about your performance. More specifically, I haven't been able to stop thinking about the person I've become. You were right to pursue your dream despite working as a waitress. I was wrong to mock you for it. But I was wrong about more than that. I was wrong about my entire life. I'm 53 years old and I realized I don't actually like the person I see in the mirror. I've spent 30 years building a real estate empire, making money and collecting expensive things. But I forgot to build a life worth living. I had a dream once too. I wanted to be an architect. Not the kind who designs ugly office buildings for maximum profit. The kind who creates spaces that make people feel something. Buildings that inspire and comfort and bring beauty into the world. My father convinced me that was impractical. That art didn't pay bills. That I should focus on business instead. So I did, I was good at it, made millions, and buried my dream so deep I forgot it existed. Until you played that piano. When you were playing, I saw something in you that I used to have. That fire. That willingness to sacrifice comfort for passion. That belief that some things matter more than money. I'm writing to tell you that I've enrolled in architectural design classes at the community college. At 53, I'm starting over. My business partners think I've lost my mind. Maybe I have. But for the first time in decades, I'm excited about something beyond profit margins. I also wanted you to know that I've started a foundation. It's called the Second Chances Arts Foundation. It will provide scholarships and support for talented people from working-class backgrounds who want to pursue careers in music, art, and design. You're the reason it exists. Your courage inspired me to find my own. Thank you for not giving up on your dream even when people like me tried to convince you to abandon it. Thank you for showing me that it's never too late to remember who you wanted to be, before the world told you who you should be. I hope your audition goes beautifully. I have no doubt you'll succeed. With deep gratitude and respect, David. Lisa read the letter 3 times, tears streaming down her face. Rachel, who'd come over to help her practice, read it too and let out a long, low whistle. So let me get this straight, Rachel said. You didn't just get $50,000 and a shot at your dream. You also accidentally fixed a broken millionaire's entire life? Lisa laughed through her tears. I guess so. Girl, you're like a fairy godmother with a piano. But Lisa knew it wasn't magic. It was just honesty. Raw, vulnerable honesty in the form of music. She'd played from her heart, and somehow that had opened David's heart too. Had reminded him that there was more to life than money and status and expensive scotch. The night before her audition, Lisa couldn't sleep. She lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, her mind racing through every note of every piece she'd prepared. Professor Mitchell had told her she was ready. Mrs. Chen had told her she was ready. Rachel had told her she'd better get that symphony job, or Rachel would fight the judges herself. But was she ready? Really ready? She got out of bed and went to her grandmother's music box. She opened it carefully, listening to the tinny mechanical melody it played. Inside was the check from David, now deposited but kept as a reminder. Underneath it was a photograph of her grandmother smiling at the camera with young Lisa on her lap at that old keyboard. Am I doing this right, Grandma? Lisa whispered to the photograph. Am I ready? And then, as if her grandmother was answering, a memory surfaced. Her grandmother's voice clear as day. Ready is just another word for brave enough to try. You don't wait until you're perfect, sweetheart. You take a deep breath and you jump. Lisa closed the music box and went back to bed. Tomorrow she would jump. And whatever happened, she knew she'd already won something more valuable than any audition. She'd won herself back. The morning of the audition arrived with gray skies and a light drizzle. Lisa stood in front of her bathroom mirror, trying for the 3rd time to get her hair to cooperate. Her hands wouldn't stop shaking. Rachel knocked on the bathroom door. You're going to be late if you don't stop fussing with your hair. It won't stay in place. It looks perfect. You look perfect. Now come on, I'm driving you whether you like it or not. Lisa gave up on her hair and grabbed her bag. Inside was everything she'd prepared. Sheet music, even though she had it all memorized. A bottle of water. Her grandmother's old handkerchief for luck. And tucked in the side pocket, David's letter, which she'd started carrying with her everywhere. The drive to the concert hall felt both too long and too short. Rachel tried to distract her with jokes and gossip about the restaurant, but Lisa could barely focus. Her mind kept running through the pieces she'd prepared, hearing every note in her head. You're going to be amazing, Rachel said as they pulled into the parking lot. You know that, right? I might throw up. That's just fear. Fear means you care, and caring means it matters. Rachel squeezed her hand. Now go in there and show them what a waitress can do. The concert hall was even more intimidating than Lisa remembered. She'd been here once before, years ago, when her grandmother had saved up enough money to buy them tickets to a symphony performance. She'd sat in the balcony then, a young girl, dreaming of someday being on that stage instead of watching from the cheap seats. Now she was here to audition, to actually try to make that dream real. The waiting room was filled with other pianists. Lisa could tell just by looking at them that they came from different worlds than she did. Designer clothes, expensive leather portfolios, the kind of quiet confidence that came from years of private instruction and performance opportunities. She smoothed down her simple black dress and tried not to feel like she didn't belong. A young man about her age sat down next to her. He had kind eyes and looked almost as nervous as she felt. "First time auditioning?" he asked. Lisa nodded. "Is it that obvious?" "Only because I recognize the look. This is my third audition with them. Haven't made it yet, but maybe third time's the charm." He smiled. "I'm Ben." "Lisa." They talked quietly while waiting, and Lisa learned that Ben had graduated from a prestigious music conservatory 2 years ago. He'd been auditioning for symphony positions all over the country, supporting himself by teaching piano lessons to kids. "The competition is brutal," he admitted. "But you can't give up, you know. What else would I do? Become an accountant?" He laughed at the thought. Lisa liked him immediately. He reminded her that she wasn't alone in this struggle, that even people with fancy degrees and professional training still had to fight for every opportunity. "Lisa Chen?" A woman with a clipboard called her name. Her heart stopped. "This was it. Good luck," Ben whispered. "Go show them what you've got." Lisa walked down a long hallway, her footsteps echoing on the polished floors. The woman with the clipboard led her to the side entrance of the main stage. Through the gap in the curtains, Lisa could see the enormous concert hall stretching out before her. Rows and rows of empty seats. And there, in the center of it all, a beautiful grand piano. "The judges are sitting in the 10th row," the woman explained. "You'll have 15 minutes. State your name, then perform your prepared pieces. They may ask you to play specific sections or stop you before you finish. Don't take it personally. They have a lot of auditions to get through." Lisa nodded, not trusting her voice to work. "You can go out whenever you're ready." Ready. That word again. Was she ready? Would she ever feel ready? She thought about her grandmother, about Mrs. Chen's belief in her, about Rachel driving her here this morning, about David's letter and his courage to start over at 53. She thought about every double shift, every sacrifice, every moment she'd chosen hope over comfort. She walked onto the stage. The piano was beautiful. A concert grand, perfectly tuned, sitting under a single spotlight. Lisa approached it the way you might approach something sacred. She sat down on the bench, adjusted her position, and looked out into the darkened auditorium. "My name is Lisa Chen," she said, her voice surprisingly steady. "I'll be performing Chopin's Nocturne in E-flat major, followed by Beethoven's Piano Sonata No. 14. Whenever you're ready, Miss Chen," a voice called from the darkness. Lisa placed her hands on the keys and closed her eyes for just a moment. This piano was nothing like the out-of-tune restaurant piano she'd been practicing on. The keys responded perfectly to her touch. The sound was rich and full and beautiful. She began to play. The Chopin piece flowed from her fingers like water, each note clear and expressive. She'd played this piece 1,000 times, but never on an instrument this magnificent. It was like the difference between speaking and singing. The piano seemed to amplify everything she was feeling, every emotion she poured into the music. She finished the Nocturne and moved immediately into the Beethoven. This piece was more technical, more demanding. It required power and precision and perfect timing. Lisa's fingers flew across the keys, her whole body engaged in the performance. She was so focused on the music that she didn't notice when one of the judges leaned forward in his seat. Didn't see when another judge made a quick note on her evaluation form. She was lost in the music, in the story she was telling through sound. When she finished, the hall fell silent. Lisa sat there, hands still on the keys, breathing hard from the exertion. She waited for them to say something, to ask her to play another section, or to thank her and dismiss her. Instead, she heard the scraping of chairs. The judges were standing up. Then they started to applaud. Lisa's eyes widened in shock. She'd never heard of judges applauding during auditions. That wasn't how this was supposed to work. "Ms. Chen," one of the judges called out, walking toward the stage. He was an older man with gray hair and glasses. That was extraordinary, truly extraordinary. Lisa stood up shakily. "Thank you, sir." Where did you train? Another judge asked, joining the first. I had lessons as a child from Professor Mitchell at the community college, but mostly I'm self-taught. I've been practicing on my own for the past 5 years. The judges exchanged glances. Self-taught? The woman judge repeated. That's remarkable. Your technique is excellent, but more importantly, you have something that can't be taught. You have genuine feeling in your playing. You tell a story. The first judge smiled. Ms. Chen, we're not supposed to tell you this right now. You're supposed to wait with the other candidates and we'll notify everyone in 2 weeks. But I'm going to break protocol here. He paused. Welcome to the symphony. Lisa's knees almost gave out. I'm sorry, what? You have the position. We still have to finish the auditions, but unless someone performs a miracle in there, you've earned a spot as our second pianist. We'll send you the official offer letter, but I wanted you to know now. You deserve to know now. Tears started flowing down Lisa's face before she could stop them. Are you serious? This isn't a joke? Completely serious, the woman judge said warmly. You have a gift, Ms. Chen, and we'd be honored to have you perform with us. Lisa left the concert hall in a daze. Rachel was waiting in the parking lot, pacing nervously. When she saw Lisa's face, she ran over. Well, how did it go? Lisa couldn't speak. She just started crying and laughing at the same time, and Rachel understood immediately. You did it? You actually did it? I got the position, Lisa managed to say between sobs. They gave it to me right there. Rachel, I'm going to be playing with the symphony. Rachel screamed and hugged her so hard they both almost fell over. They stood there in the parking lot, crying and laughing and holding each other, while the drizzle turned into a light rain that neither of them noticed. 3 months later, Lisa stood backstage at the concert hall, wearing her formal concert blacks, waiting for her debut performance with the symphony. She was nervous, but it was a different kind of nervous now. This was excitement, anticipation, the good kind of fear that came from doing something you'd always dreamed of. Mrs. Chen was in the audience, sitting with Rachel and Professor Mitchell. But there was someone else there too, someone Lisa had invited personally. David Hutchinson sat in the 3rd row, a program in his hands. He'd aged since that night at the restaurant, but in a good way. He looked softer somehow, more human. He'd actually followed through on his architectural classes and had even started designing community centers that prioritized beauty and function over pure profit. Next to him sat his first scholarship recipient, a young woman who played violin and worked as a grocery store clerk to pay her bills. David had become a mentor to her, helping her navigate the path between dreams and practical reality. The conductor raised his baton, and the symphony began to play. When it came time for Lisa's solo, she stepped forward to the concert grand piano and sat down. The lights were bright and warm. The audience was silent with anticipation. She placed her hands on the keys and thought about the journey that had brought her here. The struggles and sacrifices, the doubt and determination, the night a millionaire mocked her dream and then became the catalyst for changing it. She thought about her grandmother, and she knew somehow that she was watching. Proud, smiling, that warm smile Lisa remembered so well. And then Lisa began to play. The music filled the concert hall, rich and beautiful and real. It told the story of a girl who refused to give up. A story of courage and belief in the transformative power of following your heart. In the audience, David wiped away a tear and smiled. Because he understood now what he'd failed to understand that night at the restaurant. Dreams aren't about where you start. They're about having the courage to begin, and sometimes the most beautiful music comes not from perfect circumstances, but from imperfect people who refuse to let their circumstances define them. As Lisa played the final notes of her performance, the audience rose to their feet in a standing ovation, but she wasn't playing for the applause anymore. She was playing for that little girl at the thrift store keyboard, for her grandmother who never stopped believing, for every person who'd ever been told they weren't good enough. She was playing because this was who she was always meant to be, and that, more than any audition or position or recognition, was the real victory. The dream hadn't just come true, it had transformed everyone it touched along the way.